Mates and Ms. Jeanette. Today we'll be presenting as Group 2, and this is our line of speakers. First, I'll be presenting as Cheryl, and we have Deborah, Yijing, Xian Wei, and finally we have Shao Cong. So before we begin, we would like to show you a short clip. So sit back.
There are scenes of the most appalling carnage here, right in the centre of Bangkok's most popular shopping district. This is a temple next to a five-star hotel, very, very popular with tourists coming to wish for good fortune. We heard the most enormous bang here a few minutes ago. Saw these motorbikes over there. They were ablaze, they just put the fire out. There are bodies all over the place, people with terrible injuries. It was a very powerful blast. At the moment, we don't know what caused it, whether it was a bomb or something else, but we haven't seen these kinds of scenes before in this part of Bangkok. Very, very shocking, terrible injuries, just the most appalling destruction, and really quite unexpected.
So, do any of you know where the bombing scene was at? Okay, but more specifically, it's at the Erawan Shrine, which is at the Ratcha Krasong district, and it is mostly surrounded by popular shopping centres, such as the Central World. It happened also at the height of a rush hour at 6:55 p.m, where many of the devotees will flock to that area to make their daily prayers. It also happened on 17th of August, which before that, prior to the bombing, there were two other bombings that had taken place in February and in April. So it shows that it is very likely that such a bombing incident would happen. So as said in the video, it is a scene of unexpected carnage, with 20 people who died and 123 people were injured. So as you can see from the right hand side of the screen, anyone could be a possible casualty. Therefore, it is very devastating. How it was carried out was that a pipe bomb was wrapped in white cloth, and it was placed in two places, in a motorbike and outside of the shrine, wrapped around a lamppost. So the suspects were also said to be from Turkey and Xinjiang, China. So as you can see from the right hand side of the screen, it is CCTV shots of the suspects, the possible suspects. So you may ask, why is it Xinjiang and Turkey that these suspects were from? So let me tell you, it is because of the economic and cultural tensions that are frequently happening in China between the Uyghur minorities and the Chinese government. Therefore, it made the Uyghurs want to travel out to Turkey, and they made a transit at Thailand. So because the Thai government intervened by sending these Uyghur minorities back to China, therefore the human trafficking group which was responsible for bringing the Uyghur minorities to Turkey were angered, and the bombing was thus staged. So some of the questions that my teammates will address would be, firstly, what is the conflict between the Chinese government and the Uyghur minorities? Second, what is Thailand's role in this? Why were they chosen as a transit place? And third, how did Thailand and China react towards the bombing? Finally, we want to see what we as Singaporeans can learn from this incident. Also, our main purpose of the presentation is to see how intercultural miscommunication in a country could be bigger in a bigger scale and affect conflicts that will happen worldwide. And we also see how countries will manage these kind of conflicts. So thank you. I'll pass my time to Deborah.
Thanks, Cheryl. So right now, I'm going to talk about the root cause of why the bombing actually happened. As you know, the suspect of the bombing is actually two guys who are Uyghurs. Okay, so I'm going to touch on 2 points mainly. Who are the Uyghurs, and why the Uyghurs didn't like the Chinese government, and what are the conflicts between them. Okay, first of all, I'm going to say this is where the Uyghurs reside. They reside in a place part of China called Xinjiang. It's in the northwestern part of China, as you can see. The majority of where the Han Chinese people stays is actually this part. However, the Uyghurs actually stay in Xinjiang. And Xinjiang is a landlocked place by 8 different other countries like Mongolia and Tajikistan and many other Central Asian countries. Okay, so who are the Uyghurs? They are basically Muslim people. And so Islamic practices, their religion is all Islamic, all Muslims. And it's actually part and parcel of their life. And they speak, read, and write Turkish language, unlike the Han Chinese people who are in China. So they actually relate and regard themselves as part of the Asian country people, more so than being under the Chinese rule, and they prefer to associate themselves with the Central Asian countries. And their way of life is mainly agriculture and trade. As you know, Xinjiang is a place that is filled with mountainous regions, so they do a lot of things like horse riding and like farming. So about Xinjiang, they came under the Chinese rule during the 18th century. Previously, they were autonomous, they were self-governed. However, they didn't like being under the Chinese rule, so they actually created their own state called the First East Turkestan State in 1949. However, this independence that they had was very short-lived. In the end, they still came under the Chinese rule soon after. So last time, previously before the Chinese rule, right, the population of Xinjiang were actually 90 to 92% made up of Uyghurs. However, due to different policies implemented by the Chinese government, right now, as of 2010, there were 21.8 million people, and out of which 40.5% are actually Han Chinese. Previously, 90 to 92% were Uyghurs, and right now there's only 45% Uyghurs. So basically, why are there so many Han Chinese in Xinjiang? Because there's a policy that the Chinese government implemented called Hanification. So what happens is that there are many major development projects implemented by the government in Xinjiang, which actually attracted a lot of the Han Chinese people to resettle down in Xinjiang. And the best jobs are actually given to the Han Chinese. Why? Because under the Chinese rule, in order to get a job, you need to know Chinese, you need to read and write Chinese, which is what the Uyghurs do not know. So it was very disadvantageous for the Uyghurs. And the Han Chinese actually did very well economically. And there were also other reasons, like for example, in 2014 July, China actually banned Muslim civil servants from fasting. And as you know, this is like a very huge thing for Muslims because it's part of their religion and their culture. And there were also lesser mores and stricter and tighter rules in schools. They are not able to practice a lot of Islamic teachings and studies. They were actually forced to study Chinese, which is against what they wanted. And this very big reason why the bombing actually took place is because direct flights from China to Turkey are actually banned. So Uyghurs cannot actually fly from China to Turkey straight away. They have to go past by Thailand. So due to these factors, economic factors and cultural factors, it led to a failure of their policy. Yeah, so right now I will let Yijing talk about the trigger of why this happened.
Thank you, Deborah. So as mentioned by her, due to the conflicts between Chinese government and Uyghurs, Thailand is selected as a transit place to send Uyghurs from Xinjiang to Turkey. So why is this country selected? And what is the relation between this and the terrifying bombing in Bangkok? The reason is actually highly related to its policies, culture, and economics. Thailand has actually acquired an international reputation as a nation as a country where illegal businesses can flourish due to its poor law enforcement. And also, as a nation of high power distance, even some high-status government officers participate in illegal businesses and get benefits from them. Policemen also figure prominently as organizers and participants in recent press release. The implicit contract between authorities and smugglers makes human trafficking much easier in this area. And moreover, tourism is a big industry in Thailand, while China is a source of millions of tourists every year. So it was relatively easy for people with Chinese passport enter Thailand and difficult to figure out the differences between common travelers and the Uyghur militants. Therefore, Thailand becomes one of the best choices for successful transit from Xinjiang to Turkey. And by now, we have talked about Thailand only as a transit place between the conflicts between Chinese government and Uyghurs. So, what is a direct cause of the Bangkok bombing? And in other words, what is the trigger of conflicts between Thailand government and Uyghurs or the smugglers? The turning point is actually considered in early July that Thailand repatriated more than 100 Uyghurs according to China's request. The repatriation itself can actually considered as a sign that Thailand has seemed to move closer to China due to some political reasons. But the fact is that more than 170 Uyghurs were identified as Turkish citizens and were sent back to Turkey, and 15 more still under identity verification. This may be due to the high context culture in Thailand that try to keep a harmonious on both sides. Unfortunately, this action actually aggravated the relation between Thailand government and smugglers or the Uyghurs. So, it was reported that Thailand's consulate in Turkey was attacked by mobs of nationalist Turks and Uyghurs just several hours after the decision of repatriation. Then, 1 month later, the bombing took place in Bangkok, killing 20 people. The Thai police chief once linked the two attacks and said they were driven by the same motive, which means they were considered as a revenge against either the repatriation or the crackdown of human trafficking. So here is a possible analysis that why the bombing took place in Bangkok. Since the investigation of this event has come to a conclusion just about 1 week ago, here we can have a deep discussion about how Thailand and China reacted to the bombing.
Alright, thanks Yijing. So I'm going to mainly talk about the reaction from Thailand and China towards the bombing. So let's first take a look at how the Thai authorities react to the situation. We can see that just 1 day after the bombing, they have already released the photos of the bombing suspect. I'm pretty sure most of you have seen this picture, either through your internet or your local newspaper. Then on the very next day, the Thai police spokesperson tweeted the sketch of the bombing suspect and promised 1 million baht to anyone who can come forward to provide information. The Thai Prime Minister, on the other hand, said that he would not be drawn on the Uyghur revenge motive simply because it may cause panics and also mislead the investigation. So actually by the end of August, Bilal Muhammad, believed to be a Turkish national, was arrested at the outskirts of Bangkok. And his arrest led to the discovery of explosive used during the Bangkok bombing. Just 3 days after that, this man called Yusufu Murali, and he's from Xinjiang, China, was also arrested. And using his fingerprints to match the ones on the explosives found, the police confirmed that he was in fact involved in the bombing. So by mid of September, the Thai police chief actually outright blamed the human smuggling network who trafficked the Uyghurs to be the one responsible for the attacks. Oops. Yeah. So just recently, around 1 week plus ago, Adam Kardak, or Bilal Muhammad, he confessed that he was the one who planted a bomb, and with that confession, the Thai police was ready to prosecute both him and Yusufu Murali. And yeah, so 2 days after that, the Thai police concluded their search for the main suspect and reiterated that the crackdown of the human trafficking ring was actually the main motive for the attack, rather than the Uyghurs wanting revenge for their forced deportation in July. So let's take a look at how China reacted. So far, there has only been one reaction, which was on 20th August, where the Chinese embassy spokeswoman rejected the speculation that Uyghur militants were behind the bombing. However, even after Yusufu Murali, who was from Xinjiang, China, got arrested, there were no other responses from China. So from the reactions of these two nations, we can see different styles of conflict management. Let's first take a look at the conflict between Thai authorities and the Bangkok bombers. And we can clearly see that the style used here is competing, because the Thai authorities have carried out many investigations and arrested many suspects in order to overcome their perpetrators, they never backed down, and in the end, they did manage to get a confession out of one of the main suspects. And the second conflict here is the one between the Uyghur community and Thailand and China. So you can see some kind of avoidance here, because for Thailand, throughout their investigation, they refused to link the forced deportation of the Uyghurs back in July as a potential motive for the Bangkok bombing. And why is that so? We believe that it's because they want to avoid any kinds of friction with their Chinese ally, and at the same time to protect their lucrative tourism industry. Whereas for China, we know that all this while they have this conflict between the government and the Uyghur minority. So them avoiding fixing their conflict has indirectly brought about the happening of this Bangkok bombing. So I'm going to pass it on to Shao Cong to talk more about the overview.
Okay, so I know we have a really complicated story, and if you are still confused, don't worry, it's just a recap. So as we said, the root cause is the conflict between the Chinese government and the Uyghurs, which results in the Uyghurs trying to escape to Turkey and choose Thailand as a transit spot. Then the Chinese government requested Thailand to step in, who took down several human trafficking groups and repatriated 100 and more Uyghurs back to China. Now, the Thai government has officially confirmed that the direct cause of the Bangkok bombing is the revenge from the human trafficking group. However, we still speculate that the repatriation may also play as an important factor. And as we can see, although the government has adopted the competing strategy when hunting down the culprits, it is now denying the linking between two events, maybe to avoid conflict with China. Either way, that brings us to our central issue, that is the root cause of the whole event, which is the intercultural miscommunication between the Chinese government and the Uyghurs. Actually, apart from Uyghurs in the last few years, China has seen quite a few riots raised by the minority groups. And I think that the problem it shows is that we have a government that consists mainly of the ethnic majority, that is Han people, that do not understand the minority groups they're aware, and that causes a lot of problems, a lot of miscommunications. On the other hand, Singapore has been long praised for its ethnic harmony, and I think we can draw a parallel between the two countries on its ethnic policies to see what we could possibly learn from it. First, let's look from the economic aspect. China has a long habit of pouring large amounts of financial aid into areas populated with minority groups, that is, the autonomous. However, along with the money comes in more hand workers, attaining all the high-quality jobs, as Deborah has just said. So, the income gap is only becoming larger, which is bound to cause friction between the two parties. On the other hand, this is the median household income varies in Singapore, and we don't see that much of income disparities. Now let's move on to political equality. In China, the minority groups mainly reside in autonomouses. It means by law, they have the right to govern themselves. However, the reality is the Han Chinese still holds most of the high government positions. On the other hand, Singapore has introduced the group representation constituency to ensure that the minority groups can get themselves represented in the parliament. Then let's talk about religion. China has taken the freedom of religion as one of its basic policies. However, actually they're still making policies intervening directly with religious practices, as Deborah has just introduced. On the other hand, we don't see that much of political intervention on religion in Singapore. Finally, let's talk about inter-ethnic relationships. Singapore has introduced the ethnic integration policy to ensure that different races can mingle with each other. However, this is not that easy for China, since China is a very large country, and the minority groups mainly reside in autonomouses away from Han people. That leaves a very large room for mutual misunderstanding, since the two groups are not that familiar with each other. Okay, so from all that, there are 3 points we could possibly conclude that the Singapore government should pay attention to in the future when making ethnic policies. First, further spread inequality among races, either in economic, political, or cultural aspect. Second, do not intervene with ethnic groups, religion, or culture. Third, promote intercultural communication among races. And that is what we can learn from the Bangkok bombing. And that is the end of our presentation. Do you have any questions?
The third speaker mentioned that because Thailand welcomes like travelers from China, because China provides a big source of income from travelers. Then you mentioned it's hard to tell the difference between common traveler or Uyghur militants. But from what I understand, like the Uyghurs who enter there, they are mostly asylum seekers rather than militants. So why do you call them like Uyghur militants?
Yeah. Also, first, thank you for your question. And as you mentioned, Thailand welcomes the Chinese travelers because it brings the income for the country. And then, as I said, I separate the kind of visitors into two groups. One is the common visitors. They will have live in a hotel room. They will buy their food and to play on the to try to see around the place of interest. Yeah. And another group is the Uyghur militants, because I want to separate the difference between common Uyghurs and the Uyghur militants. So as we mentioned, most of Uyghurs live in the area of Xinjiang in China, and there are about 50% of population is Uyghurs, but we cannot see that they are all Uyghur militants. Part of them have already get used to the live with Han Chinese people, and they get used. They can live comfortably under the government of Chinese government. So they are not. They do not really want to do this kind of riots or this kind of violence, which they do not want to fly to the Turkey to get closer to their kind of background, this kind of thing. Yeah. So, but part of the Uyghurs, they still have this kind of intention, and they try to organize themselves into certain kind of groups and organize this kind of escape. Can we call that escape from China and to Turkey? So I want to try to separate this common Uyghurs and the Uyghur militants in order to make sure that now audience can understand that in the militants is only part of the Uyghur, it's not all. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to add anything? I think she was quite clear already. Okay, thank you so much.